Cloud. All right, so I'd like to welcome everyone to our session. Let's see. Our presenter today is Kim Klett. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. Kim is a senior facilitator for Echoes and Reflections who has taught English in Mesa, Arizona for 31 years. She developed a semester-long, now year-long Holocaust literature class in 2000 and teaches a class at Scottsdale Community College on the Holocaust. Ms. Klett is a museum teacher fellow of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, a teacher ambassador for Defiant Requiem, a Pathways for Peace fellow, and a teaching hard history teacher with Learning for Justice. She serves on the board of the Phoenix Holocaust Association. In addition, she is the Deputy Executive Director for the Educators Institute for Human Rights, working with teachers in post-conflict societies such as Bosnia and Rwanda. And I would love to chat with you sometime about Phoenix and the surrounding area because I'm there a lot. So,
oh, nice.
Welcome to this session, and I'll turn it over to Kim.
Thanks so much, Joan. And thanks for having me here today. Since we're such a small group, please feel free at any point to unmute yourself, ask a question. If you're uncomfortable with that, you can put it in the chat box. We're both watching that. But yeah, definitely pipe in if you have thoughts. We are going to be teaching about genocide, which Echoes and Reflections now has a brand new unit on this. And I'm so excited about it. It has some really great materials within it, and I'm excited to share those with you today. Robin, at the beginning, there's going to be just a little bit of repeat from the last session, but then everything's new after that. So Echoes and Reflections is a joint program of the ADL, or the Anti-Defamation League. They've been around for over 100 years, protecting the civil rights of all people. We also work with the USC Shoah Foundation. That was founded by Steven Spielberg after he filmed Schindler's List and realized that there were so many Holocaust survivors who had not had their stories recorded. So there are currently more than 54,000 testimonies recorded. And they've also added to the collection survivors of other genocides. So we'll hear a couple of those today. And then we also work with Yad Vashem, which is the memorial and museum in Jerusalem, Israel, and they provide a lot of our primary source materials. We've worked with over 125,000 educators across the country since we came out in 2005. I use this all the time in my classroom. It's such a great resource. And I will be taking you to the website about halfway through the slides so that you can find everything and get the materials. If you like what you see today, we do these programs regularly. Everything is free for teachers. We do in-person sessions. We do online sessions. They could be anywhere from an hour to 6 hours. I wouldn't advise 6 hours for online, but in person, it's great. So anyway, please reach out to us if you'd like to have us come to your school or your city or region or district. So our goals for today, we want to explore a sound pedagogy for genocide education, explore instructional enhancements to support student learning, discover classroom-ready assets. You're going to have access to lesson plans, those testimonies, primary source materials, all that stuff I mentioned. You're going to have at your fingertips today. You're going to enhance your personal knowledge about the Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, the Cambodian genocide, and the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis in Rwanda. I understand there are many, many more genocides, unfortunately, that we could look at, but those are the 4 that they narrowed it down to for this unit. And then we're going to build confidence and capacity for you to teach this tough subject because it is very difficult, and you want to make sure you do it well. So I want to start with a quote. Romeo Dallaire was the force commander of UNAMIR, United Nations Assistant Mission for Rwanda. And he said, all humans are human. There are no humans more human than others. That's it. And I love that quote. I love it so much that I have it on a t-shirt because it's so true, right? It seems so basic. And yet we have to remind ourselves of that sometimes because with prejudices and stereotyping and things like that, we often think that some are better than others. And we see that in our society often. So I think that's a good reminder that we can get started with here. Echoes and Reflections has pedagogical principles with all of our units and with all of our programs that we do. Robin, I'm going to go through these more quickly than I did the first time because there's a lot to get through in this program. And so basically, we just want to make sure that we're always defining terms, being really clear with what we mean, providing background on the history of anti-Semitism when we teach about the Holocaust, contextualizing the history, making sure that students know what's happening around these events and not just, honing in on one book or one experience, but looking at the bigger picture. We want to teach the human story, use primary source materials, make the Holocaust relevant. That one's hard sometimes, but we'll look at some ways to do that today with genocide as well. Encouraging inquiry-based learning and critical thinking. All of our lessons do that. We want to foster empathy and ensure a supportive learning environment. With the topic of genocide, it can be really dark. There are lots of graphic images out there, graphic videos. We don't want to bring those. You're going to see that none of the materials we have in our lessons include graphic images. I think the words themselves can be graphic enough. So we aren't there to shock the students. We're not there to scare them or give them nightmares. And I think that's a good reminder. So kind of think about these principles and, what do you already do well in your classroom and what would you like to improve on? And hopefully we can help you with that as we're going through in our short time together today. So these are some things that we want to think about with those principles. When we're talking about genocide, the importance of teaching about it, right? I think that a lot of times people teach about the Holocaust and that's it, and I'm glad they're doing that, but the kids need to know that it didn't stop with the Holocaust, that there are genocides after. We also want to make sure we avoid comparative suffering. We never want to say that people in the Holocaust suffered more than people in Rwanda, or people in this camp suffered more than those in this camp. There's no Olympics of suffering, right? There's no gold medal that you win. We want to make appropriate, meaningful connections. So not comparing, but you can make connections. We do see similar patterns in genocides. That's okay. In fact, that's a good thing to do because it can help us recognize things that are happening, maybe weren't called a genocide yet. And then we want to make sure we support our students in reflecting on deep questions because they will have those questions. And we can't always answer all the questions about genocide. I wish I could. I wish I could solve, the issue, but we still have it and we still see it. And there are a lot of big questions around it. So this is the UN definition of genocide. I always begin with this. And we talk about how it got into play. A man named Raphael Lemkin came up with the definition of genocide. When we get into the unit, I'll show you, we have a lesson about that. This came in 1948, and they defined genocide as any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part, right? So it could be part of the community or everybody is intended to be murdered. And it could be based on national, ethnic, racial, or religious groups. Okay. Now, right away, you see that there's nothing with gender. For example, there's nothing with LGBTQ issues. There's nothing with political, right? So that's something that I would talk about with my students as well. What's missing from this definition? But it's still the working definition, right? So these are the pieces, the acts that can be committed. This is what we think of first, right? That you're killing people based on, again, these pieces. It could also, though, be that you're causing seriously bodily or mental harm to members of the group. You could deliberately inflict on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction. Putting them, I think of like Native American resettlement, right? That could be, putting them in a place that's not hospitable, that's not livable. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, so sterilizations, and then forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. So that's a good place to start. And when we talk about making those definitions and really breaking it down, asking the kids, again, what problems do you see with it? Why was this a good definition at the time? Notice also that it's 1948. The Holocaust ends in 45. So we didn't have this term while the Holocaust was taking place. So maybe talking to them about why it's important to have a definition, right, for what's happening. And then this goes into, and I'm not going to read this whole thing, I'll give you a minute to look at it, but this is Raphael Lemkin's definition of genocide. So I'll let you read that. And so it might be interesting to, again, have your students look at what Lemkin wrote and then compare it to the end result, and how they streamlined it, but what they took from it, how they came up with the word. I think that's really interesting as well. So just looking at the longer definition as well could be an interesting study. These are some of the questions that kids will often ask, especially what counts. Like, does there have to be a magic number, right? That when 10,000 are killed, we'll call it a genocide, or, this question, do they have to be killed? No, because again, looking back at that second point, it could be bodily or mental harm, right? You could talk to them about the inclusion of intent and how that could be used as a shield for perpetrators. Who's missing, like I said, from the definition. And then think about how you might use these resources. Again, if we had time, we would discuss these, but I want to get through more. Again, please feel free to jump in, though, if you do have questions or thoughts. But these are some of the questions that you might want to think about asking students with that definition. This is another model. I also use this in my classroom. It's Stanton's 10 Stages of Genocide. And it's, with any kind of model, you're going to see they're not always perfect, but it is a good way for students to see, like, these things happen. They don't have to happen in this order. That's one of my problems with it, is that they don't always happen in that order, but they're always present in a genocide, right? And they give examples in some of these, like here with Cambodia or the Star of David, with symbolization. But it makes it look like, well, you have symbolization, then that leads to discrimination. And yes, it can, but again, it doesn't have to go in that order. And then dehumanization, organization, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a good model to share with students. I had mine go through this pretty extensively, and it really helped them kind of understand that we don't call everything a genocide, right? That there are things that have to happen to call it that, and looking at that UN definition as well, but that these are some things to consider. This is another one that the Zeckelman Center in Michigan came up with, and I really like this too. If you've ever seen the Pyramid of Hate, it's kind of a similar idea, but I like the way they break it down. So they start with, the context, like what's going on that is allowing something to happen when we're talking about genocide eventually. And so, for example, is there economic distress? Now we see things with climate change being a part of this. Is there political instability? Are there social divisions, right? Propaganda. And then that's going to lead to individual choices that people are going to make, so if I'm hearing things about a particular group, am I going to buy into that, or am I not? And if not, that could stop here, right? And then it goes to collective choices. So as a society or as a group, that people are like with mass incarceration, murder, this culture of violence that we see a lot of times with genocide. And then again, if these are all left unchecked, it's going to lead to genocide. So I really like this model as well. Again, you could pick and choose. You could show your students all of them and let them decide what works for them and helps them understand it. Again, these are the ones that we're going to focus on for today. And I tried to pull something from each so that you can see a little bit of each. All right, so starting with the first lesson, it's what do genocides destroy? And as soon as I'm going to take you in just a couple more slides to the unit, and you can see what I mean by how it's broken down. And so this gets to our identity, right? What we look like, what do we like or dislike? What's our, so-called race? What's our ethnicity? All kinds of things that can be part of that identity. I do these in my class. With classes, I did them in all my classes, where I would have kids do I called them identity maps. And it could look like this. I let them be very creative. I got some really pretty ones. But it's just, their name in the middle and how they identify. I had them also put their pronouns, their preferred pronouns here. Again, up to you. But just, it's a great way to get to know the kids. You could share them. It's a good way for them to get to know each other as well. But it gets them thinking again about their identity, because that's a big piece of this. And then we want to look at life before genocide, right? Victims of genocide aren't living their lives in this shadow of this impending catastrophe. They have what we call a normal life right before this. They have interests, they have hobbies. This is where we might find relevancy for our students with some of these victims. And they don't know what's going to happen in the future. So I want to share, this is an Armenian survivor. And so I'm going to take you to the unit. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a second and then get the page open to show you what Echoes and Reflections looks like. If you would like to follow along, it's echoesandreflections.org if you're a hands-on kind of learner. You can follow on my screen as well, so totally up to you. When you get to echoesandreflections.org, this is what pops up. And most of the time, you could put, by the way, you could put students on here. There are no answer keys or anything like that on it. It's really meant for teachers, but there are some things that you might want your students to go to on the site. So perfectly fine. Most of the time, you're going to go to this teach column. And so when you open that up, here's that pedagogy that we looked at earlier. And then here are the lesson plans. When you click on lesson plans, these are really units and they go pretty much in chronological order. So you have studying the Holocaust, anti-Semitism, Nazi Germany, the ghettos, the final solution, liberation, Jewish resistance, rescue and righteous among the nations, complicity and responsibility, justice, life, and memory after the Holocaust. And then you get to the unit on contemporary anti-Semitism, which is the next session if you want to come back to that one. And then what we're doing now, teaching about genocide. So I'm going to open this up. All of our units are set up exactly the same. So you start with a quote. There's that one that we had on the slide deck from Dallaire. You have your keywords for that unit. So any of the words that come up that we felt students might need help with are in this kind of glossary. They also will say them. So here you go.
Budgets.
Okay. So it pronounces it for you, which is really nice. And this is probably my favorite part of Echoes and Reflections is that everything is spelled out for you. So if you wanted to use this unit on Monday, it would be pretty easy to sit down with, today or tomorrow and map out your plan. a lot is done for you here. It's also really nice if you're a new teacher or new to teaching about this topic, because it gives you your essential questions, background information up here. You've got your objectives, everything's spelled out. You have your academic standards that are unique for each unit and each lesson that break down everything for the social studies and ELA standards. Both are included in that. So everything you need. And then it breaks it down into, so this is what I was talking about with the coming up with the definition with Raphael Lemkin, all of this kind of stuff. You also have, I love these. So if you don't have time to teach all of these genocides, you could jigsaw it, right? You could have different students reading about each of these and put them into groups that they then report back on, right? So you could have a group do Armenia, another group do the Holocaust, Cambodia, and Rwanda. These are like 2 to 3 pages, and they're just all the background information on what happened in each. And then here we have our testimonies. So this is the one I wanted to show you first. First of all, the Armenian genocide happened starting in 1915. So it's amazing that they got testimonies and recorded them, obviously much later in life for these people, but I think it's just amazing. This man was born in 1911, so he was a child when it happened. He was born in the Ottoman Empire. He was the oldest sibling of 3 boys. After the genocide, his family moved to Italy and then eventually came to the US. He graduated from Yale University with a Master of Fine Arts degree, and he spent the last 57 years of his life working on his ranch. He was 4 years old when the Armenian genocide began. And so I just want you to kind of think about how your students might react, how this might help them relate to this man who, again, was born in 1911, right? That they might look at him normally and think, I have nothing in common with this guy. Think about what might be relevant to them. And also, he's talking about his life before. Why is that important to discuss with genocide? So think about that as we listen to his very brief testimony.
The long periods of cooking. My mother used to cook all types of Armenian dishes, which were great, wonderful, and nostalgic memories of my past. I loved the Armenian things that were not that are not restaurantable today. They took an awful long time to do.
Yeah, let's move on.
Yeah, many of our contests had to do with gatherings where we children were always taken. We weren't left home. And then we would also have these contests where the elderly would tell these wonderful old stories that were sometimes made usually for adult people. And when we were supposed to be sleeping in another room with a babysitter, I would wake up and walk to the door and listen to these fascinating stories. Also, we had picnics, long, just incredible number of people. We'd go up into the mountains, we'd dig a hole and put this huge crock with all types of vegetables and meats and so on, and cook it semi-underground. And all through the day, people would eat meze, it's called, hors d'oeuvres, drinking raki, and we dance on oriental rugs. And then certain groups of people would be in one place, and then other groups would be in a hill next to it, and so on. And at night, we would start singing some Armenian songs that would be, we would sing certain stanzas of it, and groups in the other mountain would echo and sing the second verses, etc. Anyway, these are the pleasant things that happened in Armenia.
Okay, so is there anything that stood out to you, excuse me, that you think your students would relate to?
That connection to the family events and everybody being together, like that's totally a connection that students would be like, oh yeah, I remember we do that too. I love that.
Yeah. And the food, specific foods, we all have those, memories of. I agree. And I think too, it's so important again to show the students that he's first of all, he's a real person, right? Who suffered this. He never says anything about the genocide. But it's so important to show that these people had lives before that, right? That they're not just identified by what happened to them. So I think that's a really important point. Any other questions or thoughts on his testimony? And there are others in the unit. For example, we have a man from Rwanda who also talks about his life before that as well. Okay, so I want to take you back to the PowerPoint for a minute, and then we'll come back to the website as well. And I'm going to skip a few slides just in the interest of time. Okay, so there he is. And again, there's that question of understanding who these people were, very important. I'm going to skip over these. Sorry, they're important, but we only have an hour. We do include artwork and all kinds of great things in this unit. But the next thing I want to look at is the next lesson in the unit. It's the third one called How Do Genocides Destroy? And I want you to think about, these are some risk factors for genocide, kind of at that lower level of that pyramid that we were looking at, things that happen, but also with propaganda, right? Propaganda, we know from the Holocaust, was a huge factor in shaping the way that people felt about the Jews and other groups that were persecuted. Here, this is from Rwanda. The patient is saying, I'm sick, doctor. What is your sickness? The Tutsi, Tutsi, Tutsi. And the Tutsi were the targets, of course, in the genocide against the Tutsis of 1994 in Rwanda. And so really thinking about the media, what people are seeing, how does that work into that rise, right, that we see in people accepting these stereotypes, accepting these beliefs about different groups of people. So with that, I want to take you back to the website again and show you another testimony. This one is on Holocaust. Share my screen. There we go. So we're still in that same unit. There's Mr. Zorthian, like I said, a Rwandan survivor as well. You also have a graphic organizer you could use with that. And here's our lesson, How Do Genocides Destroy? You have examples of propaganda, which includes the one that I just showed you. But I want to show you Marion Pritchard. Marion was born in 1920 in Amsterdam, and she was studying at the Amsterdam School for Social Work when she was arrested for suspicion of participating in resistance activities. She was released from prison after 6 months. She continued her work with the resistance, and she helped approximately 150 Dutch Jews to survive the war in hiding. She supplied them with food and false papers. She was 18 years old when the war began. And I want you to think about, again, her very different response and what her life was like and why she felt the need to do this.
And they did it one little tiny step, but after another little tiny step, as they enforced all their regulations to stop Jews from mixing with Gentiles, it did look different. The benches in the park had signs on them that said no Jews. Stores had signs that said no Jews. Trolley cars. So You didn't see people going in and out of the synagogues anymore because, the people weren't there anymore.
Had there been any Nazi propaganda at all before?
Oh, when?
Up until this time or
The minute they walked in, they began with the propaganda. I think that's what I said a little while ago. They started this education propaganda campaign to set the Dutch against the Jews. They made all the movie theaters show a movie called De Eeuwige Jood, the Eternal Jew. And one of our Jewish sociology teachers told us to go and see it. And we went, the Jews could still go to the movies at that point, and we looked at the movie and we sat and laughed and made smart remarks all the way through and disagreed with everything they said. But when we came out, a Gentile friend said to me, I wish I hadn't seen that movie because now for the first time I have a feeling of them and us. I now look at, and pointed to the Jewish kids that were walking, a few steps away, said it's them, and they're not us, and I don't like it. I'm going to help them as much as I can, but it shows that even with people who want to resist propaganda, it still has an effect.
First of all, any thoughts or questions on Marion Pritchard? I really like her testimony because most of the testimonies we have in here are Jewish survivors. And so I love her perspective as a non-Jewish, what we might call a rescuer, right? Again, that she helped with the hiding of 150 people and her role in that. And that answer at the end, that she sees this propaganda and instead of buying into it, like so many people probably did, she is angry, right? And saying, look at what they're doing. They're trying to make this group as the other. And so I think she's a really good example because I think a lot of times our students believe that they can't do anything, that they can't say anything. And of course they can. Yeah, exactly, Robin, the them and us, right? Pitted against each other. And she doesn't buy that. And I love that. And she was a young person, at the time. And so I think it could be a really inspirational video clip to use with our students. All right, so I'm going to take you back. Yeah, exactly, Joan. That one piece of propaganda. And that movie is absolutely horrible. And there were lots of things like that they were seeing, right? Wherever the Nazis went, again, she's in Amsterdam, wherever the Nazis went, all of that propaganda, all of their ideology, everything followed them. And so it's a good point for that as well. All right, let me get back to the PowerPoint and I want to show you a few more slides and then we'll go back. Sorry, all the back and forth, but with this one, there's just a lot of good stuff in both places that I want to share with you. All right, so it's coming up here. So there's that. And then I want to skip ahead again. Again, this is set up for there's Marion, set up for a longer program. The next part of the lesson is called the conflagration, like where everything escalates, right? And so we have some more clips that you might notice. We're not going to watch them, but they are there. They're very good. And then we get into the aftermath, and that's what I wanted to focus on for the rest of our time together here. And so thinking about how do you recover from genocide, right, as a society? What needs are there? Obviously, there are immediate needs and then long-term needs. The genocide against the Tutsis in 1994 is coming up on its 30th anniversary next year. And they're still dealing with the repercussions from it, right? And I think Rwanda is a good example of how to, I don't want to say bounce back, but how to return, right, to a better society. And I think they've done a good job, but it's not 100%, right? There's still lots and lots of issues that they're dealing with. So this is another graphic organizer that, again, the Zeckelman Center built with this idea of how do you get back to peace? And so again, that context with the background conditions. So you need that economic prosperity, right? If it goes back to a horrible economy and such, that's going to make people divide again. You need that political stability, social cohesion, things like that, peaceful messaging, not the propaganda, right? And then again, that's going to build to how individuals react, like caring for people, welcoming others, appreciating diversity, and then those collective as a society, what they have to do. One of the things Rwanda has done is they have a day every month where it's required that you do community service. Every citizen has to do it. And I think that's a really interesting and fantastic way of getting people involved and caring. And all of this is going to add up to peace, right? It's going to build to that peace. So I really like that graphic. And one of the things that Rwanda had to do was figure out justice and what is that going to look like? You have these perpetrators who are living amongst them. How is that going to work? How is that going to be peaceful? And so there was an international criminal tribunal for Rwanda. It's brought, I think, if I remember right, about 90 some people to justice, but it was very expensive. The Gacaca courts, this word, Gacaca, seem to do much better. That's what you're seeing here. It translates to justice on the grass. And so you have people here who are listening to this person. He's, been accused of perpetrating genocide in some way. And he has to say, his piece. And then they decide as a community what happens to him. Does he get jail time? If so, how much? There is not a death penalty in Rwanda. There were some through the ICTR who were sentenced to death, but not through Gacaca. They served jail terms. And I believe 25 years was the maximum. So some of them are getting out. Some already have gotten out, right? And then not only the justice, but also commemorations, right? There's one in Rwanda called Kwibuka, which is basically a reenactment of the genocide, which I don't know, to me sounds horrible, but I'm not Rwandan, so I'm not going to judge it. But that's something that they have done in the past, making national and local genocide memorials. They have many, many, many throughout Rwanda. And so that's what I want to look at next. So I'm going to take you back to the website again, still in the same unit. And we are going to look at some memorials, 2 different genocides. And my students, again, really liked doing this. Okay, here we go. So we're back on, we are. So these are the some of the others that I think are really good that you might want to check out, the testimonies. Again, you have a Rwandan and then Armenian, really, really good. I think that Thierry Sang, who, if we had more time, we would watch hers. She has a really good one about justice. That's amazing. But again, lack of time. So here's the section we're in now with the aftermath. And I want to show you the memorials and we'll talk about these a little bit. Okay. So these are for the Armenian genocide. This is an aerial view of what this looks like. And then there's another view. It's a museum and a memorial in Armenia. And I don't know, this one to me was a little bit hard to hone in on and see with the pictures. But I think that the idea that, what does the top look like to you? like especially the coloring of it. Does anybody else see clouds? Because I see like a sky,
Is it
right?
open or is that the ceiling of it? Because it looks like the open sky, but
Right.
it's not.
No, it's like painted that way, I
Oh, okay,
guess.
okay.
Yeah. And this is again an aerial view looking down right at it of the top of the building. And so I think, you know, with the sky, we think of hope and endless possibilities and, you know, things like that. And so what I like to talk about with these with my students is the fact that um, there's so much thought put into a memorial or a museum, right? There's just so much thought and everything that goes into that piece, right? Here you have your picture of the whole thing, and you can see it's very reflective, right, as well, which is meaningful. Even the placement, that's something you could do, is have them go onto like Google Earth and have them actually go to the museum and memorial and see, okay, where is it in relation to, you know, what's around it? Why did they pick that particular place? Lots of great questions that you can ask about these specific memorials. And then you have Holocaust memorials. This one is at one of the camps, Belzec, which was a killing center, an extermination camp in Poland. 500,000 Jewish people were killed there, and other groups as well. You can see there's Hebrew written up here. And this is where the ashes are contained in this. It's huge. There are a couple of the camps that have this. I've not been to Belzec, but I've been to Majdanek, and they have a similar piece. And again, this is what it looks like from above. And sorry, no, that's Yad Vashem. Sorry. This is Yad Vashem in Israel. And this one, very modern. This ends up looking out. Again, that hopeful piece, right? You've got the different parts that look out. You've got the whole grounds as well, which again, if you took your kids on Google Earth, they'd be able to see the different parts. It's not just the building, but the grounds as well that are significant and really interesting to study. So there you get two different pieces. Cambodia, it's interesting to see because every country does their memorials very differently. This one is adjacent to the mass graves, as you can see, the so-called killing fields. This is in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. And then this is the museum that goes with it. And it is located where a prison was formerly, where over 12,000 were murdered. And that's another interesting discussion where, you know, here you have a site, just like we had up here at Belzec. You know, these are places actually where the people were murdered, and how that's different from, you know, this museum in Armenia. So really interesting conversations that you can have about these. My kids just always think that this is a really interesting looking building, right? They like looking at the architecture. And again, maybe they could do more to think about why it was built the way it was. And then for Rwanda, this is at the Kigali Genocide Memorial. There's a wall of names. My kids always connected that to the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C., if they had seen it. There are 250,000 people buried in mass graves in this complex. And these are the graves, actually. These are kind of covered with cement. And then the museum, you can see below, this is like a reflecting pool and a little statue here, lights up at night. So interesting conversation that you can have about memorials and what's memorialized and why, and just really interesting pieces with that. I want to play this. I'm going to go back to the slides, but since we're here, I don't want to do any more back and forth. So I'm going to play, I usually end with this, but I want to play Jan Karski's piece. And just so you know, before I play him, I forgot to point this out in the last session, you get the little bios with each testimony, but here are longer bios. So you can always get more information about the person if you'd like to utilize that. Jan Karski, fascinating story in the Holocaust. He was born in 1949 in Łódź, Poland. And between 1939 and 1942, he carried messages between the Allied nations and the underground. In the fall of 42, he was smuggled into the Warsaw Ghetto so that he could write reports on the living conditions there. And he took those. He went to high-ranking officials. He actually spoke to FDR. He spoke to people in England and the US. So he has a really interesting story. He was 25 years old when the war began. And he has a really good message that I like to end with.
Great crimes start with little things. You don't like your neighbor. You don't like him because he's black or yellow or café con leche or whatever it is. Avoid this. Avoid disliking people. Try to cooperate. Don't make distinctions. Bad nations, good nations, it's a nonsense. Don't believe in nationalism based on ethnicity. It's a nonsense again. That I am a Pole because my family for generation was Polish, no Germans in my family, Jewish or something. It's a nonsense. There are no clear, pure races. Anyway, this is what else. I am not a prophet. I don't have messages. Humanity is making progress.
I like to use him with students because, again, he does have this hopeful message, like we're making progress. Now, he also was recorded many, many years ago and might have something different to say now, but I don't share that with students necessarily. And again, just this message of acceptance, right? Of just accepting people for who they are. It doesn't matter. All these things that we do often with color or background or anything like that. All right, so we're going to go back to the slides for just a minute and then we'll wrap up. And again, let me know if you have any thoughts or questions. There we go. Slideshow. All right, so I'm going to skip a couple of slides. Like I said, this woman from Cambodia has a really good point about justice, so you might want to check her testimony out. But I wanted to come back to this again with those museums and memorials, emotions and feelings. What was the intent? What's understated? What's ignored? What's missing from it? Why did the creator make decisions? Because I always told my students that good art is controversial, right? And these memorials are pieces of art. And so what controversies come up and did maybe, did the artist want or architect want people talking about this? And so were certain choices made for that reason. So there can be some really rich discussions. Another thing I would have my students do is they created their own monuments. And so, I would have them think about who would they want to memorialize or what group of people and why and where exactly would they put it. Like, again, they'd have to go to Google Earth and decide exactly where in a city it would be and give their rationale for that. And then what materials would they use to make their monument and why would they select those materials? And it was really, they loved doing it. It was kind of a final project that we would do. So just a thought of another way that you could extend that. All right. This is something that we also have in the unit. Ben Ferenz was a part of the Nuremberg trials. And so when we're talking about justice, he definitely connects. They have something on the website called Dimensions in Testimony. This is like the holograms, I guess. I don't love them, but I will, share this with you. Some teachers really like it. Every time I used it, we would ask questions and we'd always have to reframe it like 3 or 4 different ways, because they're intuitive to an extent, right? So anyway, you have to be very patient with them, but I wanted to include the fact that we do have that in that unit. It's in that first lesson. There's Jan Karski. And as we wrap up, I just wanted to point out another thing that we have now in Echoes and Reflections. This is relatively new. Back on that Teach page, we have student learning activities about the Holocaust that your students can do independently. They're watching videos and testimonies and answering questions. And they go kind of chronologically, as you can see here. This just shows the first 5, but there are 10 of them. They take about an hour to complete. I had my kids do a couple of them on their own and gave them a week to complete it. They didn't need that much time, but I gave them that. And they kind of enjoyed that independent learning. So I wanted to point out those are there. And then also, we didn't go to this part, but there's a prepare section on our website. And we have all kinds of resources. Again, they're all free for teachers. We have webinars every month, 4 or 5 a month, that are an hour long about lots of different topics. We have an online course going all the time, different topics. Those, again, are free for you to take. And then just a lot of other resources that you can check out. So definitely check out the prepare section as well. And I'm going to actually I'm going to stop sharing. Don't use that QR code because I can't remember if it's right or not. I am going to I know that Joan put in a survey and attendance link. Echoes and Reflections also has one that we ask you to fill out. It will ask you for my name, so I'll put that in the chat box as well, although it's on the screen. And then today we did, it'll ask you which session. We did teaching about genocide. And then it will just ask you some other questions. Please do include your email if you would like to be contacted for the newsletter, things like that. They just give you updates about programs that we have coming up like this. And it's a good list to be on, I think. Any other questions or thoughts about teaching about genocide? All right. Well, I'll let you fill that out. I'm going to stay on just in case you have any questions with that. Feel free to ask if there's anything else on that survey that doesn't make sense.
Thank you so much, Kim, for the presentation. It was riveting for me. I learned so much. I really learned a lot, and I want to check out the resources for my own, increasing my own knowledge. So thank you also to Robin and Leander for being here. Please make sure that you fill out that attendance form. It's important coming up for the closing session. So make sure you get those in and fill out your 2 session surveys. The next session in this room is anti-Semitism, understanding and countering this hatred today. And it'll start in about, I think it starts at 2, right? In about 5 minutes. 2:05 starts in 10 minutes. So you've got a couple minutes to grab a drink of water, and we're happy to see you if you come back. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Really great.
Thanks, Kim. Have a good night.
Yeah, you too. Thanks. All right, so I'll go ahead and sign out, Joan, and then sign in for the next one. Are you with me again?
Okay, yep, and I'm glad that you said that because I remembered now to stop recording.